and I'm sitting down drinking my second cup of coffee. And I wanted to go online just to talk about a few of the things happening in our country, both over the weekend as well as going into this second week of February. Before I begin, as I always do, let me start just by acknowledging that I'm speaking to you from the lands of the Piscataway. The Piscataway, they're the nation that they've lived here, they've hunted here, they've farmed here and fished here, they've raised their families here and buried their dead here long before Columbus got lost at sea. I also want to acknowledge and just share with you a little bit of the history that I learned about some of these lands even over the weekend. I was doing some research because if you look on native-land.ca, it says that not only the Piscataway but also the Natashkunk are from the lands in these areas. And so I did some research on the Natashkunk over the weekend, and they were the native inhabitants of a village along what is now known as the Anacostia River. And when that river was first explored by white colonizers in the 1600s, they came across the Natashkunk people and began trade with them. So unfortunately, after the introduction of alcohol, after the introduction of disease, after the establishment of white settlements, and of course the colonization of these lands, the inhabitants of that village were close to becoming extinct. And the last of the Natashkunk actually folded in or became a part of the Piscataway nation. And that village, those people are now extinct. And so I want to acknowledge the Natashkunk. I want to honor their memory. And I want to also thank them for their stewardship of these lands. And I want to thank the Piscataway for being the host people and the stewards of the land where I'm living, which is now known as Washington, D.C. There's a lot to talk about. I've literally been sitting here for a while trying to think what I wanted to discuss today because there's so many things going on. Over the weekend, of course, we have the coup, the military coup going on in Myanmar, which the U.S. has condemned, and I'm glad we've condemned it, but I also lament our lack of integrity in this condemnation. Right, we're literally about ready to go into a week of a trial within our own Senate, where our senators have already basically decided they don't think they need to hold Donald Trump accountable for his actions of inciting an insurrection within our own country. And yet, of course, we will stand up and boldly condemn military coups other places around the world, but we will not hold people within our own nation accountable. What's happening in Myanmar absolutely deserves condemnation. And we need to, those sorts of military coups need to be called out, and they're unjust, and they need to be condemned. But the United States of America, unfortunately, has no integrity in issuing such a condemnation, even by example, what's going on this week within our own Senate, which already has demonstrated does not have the integrity to even be jurors in the trial that we're hosting this week, right? After our Senate was sworn in as jurors, they basically held a vote about whether or not they thought this trial was constitutional. I think even virtue of voting in that would disqualify you from any normal jury that had any sort of semblance of justice. But yet this is what we have. It just kind of goes to show what a sham justice in our nation is. But anyway, that's been going on this week. We also there's a story I want to share with you. It's happened in Utah over the weekend, and I found an article in AP News. I just shared it in the chat. There's a school in Ogden, Utah, where some of the parents, that district is 70% white, or the school is 70% white. There's only a few African-American students in the school. And some parents had written in and asked that their children be able to opt out of the Black History curriculum that was being offered this month. And initially the school agreed to it. They lamented it, but they said they would allow those families to opt their children out of studying or learning the Black History Month curriculum that the school was offering that month. They posted something on their Facebook page, and of course, once news got out publicly, there was an outcry from the community, and the school since reversed its course and now has said those families cannot opt out, and the families have actually now withdrawn their request to opt out. Again, this is not surprising. This is the United States of America. This is what we do. This is how things happen here. I think the challenge is what we saw in Ogden, Utah, both from these families that were trying to pull their children out of these lessons, as well as the response of the school, and now the response of the public, is this is what the racial dialogue in our nation has been boiled down to, which is the difference. It's this waffling back and forth between white fragility and white people are racist, right? And this is the whole debate. So the school obviously had some perception that there was white fragility going on, and these white parents were assuming didn't want their kids to hear this degrading history of their nation. And so they asked if they could opt them out. And the school, rather than confronting them and saying, no, this is something we have to learn, we have to be a part of, chose to treat them as fragile and allowed them to opt out. And then once that became public, then of course the dialogue turns to, well, this is racism and this is horrible, and now it's condemning. And it doesn't let us have the real conversation, right? This is one of the reasons why even in my book, Unselling Truths, we have a whole section on trauma. And I talk about how white America is another group of traumatized people, not victims of trauma, but experiencing a multi-generational and communal manifestation of a complex manifestation of a perpetration-induced traumatic stress. And understanding that white people are traumatized. They're not victims of trauma, but they're experiencing a perpetration-induced traumatic stress from the history that they're standing on. They are in the state of shock and denial and don't want to deal with, understand, or even look at their own history. And so when the school treated them as fragile and said they could opt out, and now they're calling them racist and decrying them, it doesn't create an environment where the family can actually really learn. These families can learn this history and be confronted with wrestling with what it is they're standing on. And this is lamentable, right? I'm disappointed that in that situation in Ogden, Utah, they waffled back and forth between white people are fragile and white people are racist, and it doesn't allow the real conversation to happen. This is one of the reasons why I'm really encouraging people to read this book, Unselling Truths, because this understanding that white America is another group of traumatized people is probably one of the most effective tools I've been able to develop to keep white people from derailing necessary conversations on race and white supremacy. It doesn't give them a pass. I'm not doing their work for them. It just helps me to understand what's going on for white America, so that they do not have as many options to derail these important conversations that we need to have, like what we're trying to have right now during Black History Month, with the understanding that we do not teach our history of our nation. And so we need to have periods set aside where we intentionally focus and try to set patterns of educating ourselves about these things. And this month in February, we are trying to focus on and intentionally look at our misconceptions and our lack of understanding of Black history. And so, yeah, I was disappointed to see what happened in Ogden, Utah. And it's my hope that we will become better as a nation at addressing these things. And instead of just going back and forth between white fragility and white is racist, we'll actually begin to understand some of the underlying trauma that's going on and not give white people a pass on the history they're standing on and let them claim victim, but also allow us to have the deep and necessary conversations to wrestle with this history, to create what is called common memory, right? This a much more comprehensive understanding of who we are as a nation, how we became who we are today, and what we need to do to begin to change that. So yeah, this is also one of the things that's going on this week. I also just want to talk a little bit about where we're at right now as a nation. We are going into, I think it's the third or maybe the third week, I think now, of the Biden administration. And unfortunately, things are really going back to the status quo, which is exactly what he promised to do, right? That was what he ran on, is he was not going to deal with things at a foundational level. He was going to initiate a contentious dialogue on color schemes, but he wasn't going to address things at a foundational level, which is exactly what he's doing, which is why instead of talking about changing the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, he's issuing executive orders, because it's not about changing the foundations, it's about just changing the color scheme. And it's challenging because while this is definitely a step up from maybe where we were even 8 weeks ago under the Trump administration, it's not where we need to be, right? It's not the conversations we really need to have. And so there's a lot of screaming and bickering and compromise going on about color schemes, but there's no real discussion going on about the foundational level issues. And we see this all around us, right? We see this even in the Super Bowl yesterday. Well, okay, they asked the fans of the Kansas City football team to not do their tomahawk chop before the game, but the team still ran out to this very stereotypical native war cry, right? Native war chant. And yeah, nothing's changed. It's just maybe we're not showing it on TV, or we're not acting enough to do it as explicitly, but we're still have the underlying problems going on, right? And so this is the challenges we're facing right now as a nation, is we really are returning to the status quo. And as urgent as some of the conversations the Biden administration is trying to initiate seem to be, they're not addressing things at a foundational level. And that's where we need to change things. That's where we need to really bring a different dialogue to the table. And this is some of the work that I really want to encourage us to do as a nation. There's even already been some talk and some people announcing runs for Senate in 2022. And there's more and more people declaring. And I really want to encourage, especially younger people, to consider running for office in this next election, in the 2022 midterm elections. I feel very strongly that we need a new generation of leaders at the table. And we need to have a discussion at a foundational level about what we're going to do about our racist, sexist, and white supremacist foundations. Because that's not the conversation we're having today. That's not the conversation that Joe Biden wants to have. That's not the conversation Mitch McConnell wants to have. That's not the conversation Nancy Pelosi wants to have. That's not the conversation that Chuck Schumer wants to have. And so they're screaming about color schemes and partisanship, but they're not addressing things at a foundational level. And those are the conversations we absolutely need to have. And so again, just like in Ogden, Utah, instead of actually teaching Black History Month, now we're screaming about the racism and the fragility of these white parents and the school district in the school, instead of focusing on, let's talk about the actual history that's going on this month. So this is, there's a lot of things happening right now. And I know a lot of people are frustrated. I also know there's a lot of frustration around COVID-19. I think our nation is hitting a very, we're becoming weary, correct, of social distancing, of wearing masks. We're now almost going into a full year of the pandemic. And while there's a vaccine, obviously the mutations of the virus is concerning, and the effectiveness of the vaccines is concerning, as well as the delays in the rollout and the availability of the vaccines. And there you can sense this national weariness, of continuing to press forward in this. And I want to continue to encourage people to continue to find the strength to continue to be adamant about social distancing, about wearing our masks in public, about keeping our bubbles within our immediate family, and about not going into large gatherings or not risking the health of others or those around us. We need to continue to take a long-term look at this. Even when we went into this pandemic a year ago, right, people took a short-term view of it. And they initially said, well, we'll be here for a few months, and by May or April or May, we'll be out of the lockdown and people will go back to normal and we'll be back in school. And of course, that didn't happen. And now we also have to be very careful not to say, well, we have a vaccine, so within a few weeks, everything's going to be back to normal. And we have to realize that we are in the midst of a pandemic with a virus that is quickly mutating. And we are struggling to get vaccines rolled out, not only within this country, but we're not even talking yet about the challenges being faced in other nations around the world that are not as wealthy and cannot even purchase vaccines at the moment. And so I want to encourage people to continue to take a long-term approach to this. Not to cope with this pandemic by saying things will change within a few weeks. I am anticipating that we will probably be out of school, at least with my own children. I'm telling my own children it probably won't even be till next fall, or maybe even longer, until we're really back in school and can do that safely. We have school districts and communities that are demanding that the teachers can go back into the classroom, and yet they're not willing to vaccinate them or to change the HVAC and the protocol, the air conditioning and the airflow within the school to keep them safe. And again, we're asking people to literally risk their lives for the sake of keeping our economy going. And I know it's a huge priority, and we need to get our children back into school. We need to do that. Even I see that in our own community, and I see the challenges happening within our youth, and that needs to be addressed. But we have to find a way to do this safely and with concern for the value of everybody's life who's involved, the teachers, the children, the parents. And we need to invest money in this. We need to invest resources in this. We need to be thinking not only about how can we get back in school as quickly as we can, but how can we make online learning better? How can we be better at that so that it does not leave our students as disenfranchised or as isolated as they are right now during this challenge of education. So I just want to encourage everybody to please continue to take a long-term approach to this. There is an end in sight, but we cannot rush our way to get there. And we need to realize that there are still a lot of things that need to happen before life can get back to normal here in the United States and even around the world. So, yeah, and also continue to acknowledge just the amount of trauma that we're facing as a nation, right? Hundreds of thousands of deaths. Millions of people have been exposed and contracted the virus. Life has been upended physically, financially, emotionally, relationally for everybody around the globe. And we have to be able to acknowledge that, right? If you've lost someone, and actually in our own family, we've lost some members of our family, not immediate family, but of our extended family, even in the last few weeks. And you need to take time to mourn and to acknowledge the pain and the loss, not only the loss of that life and the loss of that relationship, but the fact that we can't even mourn these things properly because we can't gather together in times like this. And we need to acknowledge that. We need to acknowledge that pain. We need to acknowledge that emotional pain that we're feeling because of these things. And so I want to encourage people to continue to have endurance during this time, continue to acknowledge the emotions and the challenges we're facing as a nation, as communities, as a world, and to continue to do what is necessary to protect your life as well as the life of the most vulnerable in your community. We are in the midst of a pandemic, and it's not over yet. And we need to continue to be consistent with wearing masks and social distancing and keeping those most vulnerable around us as safe as we possibly can. There's many other things I hope to address later this week. The trial for former President Trump, Donald Trump, starts tomorrow. And obviously there's issues with the stimulus bill that's happening, and a lot of things we need to continue talking about. And so I hope to continue talking throughout this next week. But I just wanted to jump on for a few minutes and talk about a few things and encourage everyone to continue to walk in beauty. And may we learn how to walk in beauty together. Ashehat, my relatives, and Hakkonet.